I was asked today to talk about how administrators can support their teachers and school staff to understand how they can best help. So, one of the things that I'd like to start with today is understanding that our EAL students are coming with assets. We often think of our students who are in French immersion or perhaps other bilingual programs as being more educated, having an asset, a benefit of having more than one language. And what we need to understand is that's the same as our EAL students, our multilingual learners. And I just like to think about our EAL students as coming with so much. So today we're going to talk about their assets, not their deficits, and how we can create a welcoming, supportive environment for the families and students, what your teachers will need, and some resources. And I'm going to jump right in here. Our EAL students and their families bring many languages, many cultures, different experiences, background knowledge, and many expectations. One of the things I like to talk about with our students is, what languages do you have? Do you hear some languages at home? And one particular student I'm thinking about, grade 4 student I worked with last year, I'm subbing as well, and he brought with him 4 languages. He's Eritrean, his family's Eritrean, they speak Eritrean at home. He's also Muslim. He's learning Arabic for reading the Quran. He was born in Israel. He went to school for kindergarten, grade 1 and 2, learning Hebrew. And now he's in Canada learning English. We would not have known that from his registration document. The parents put Eritrean, but he has more of a language bank. Has it always been an asset for him? It might be if he continues. He'll certainly continue Eritrean and Arabic, we hope. And of course, English. I highly doubt he'll continue with Hebrew. But thinking about their languages and also about how we can support our teachers to understand that we want our students to maintain and grow their home language, often called mother tongue or mother tongue, first language, home language, or I like the term heart language. So when I hear, and I still hear people saying, speak English, or parents will say, oh, we'll speak English at home. Really encourage students, families, teachers that first language helps build better brains, just like we want our kids who are in immersion and bilingual programs to have an additional language. We don't want them to lose that mother tongue. Our students come with many cultures, and I learned the hard way many years ago that just because you come from a Middle Eastern country doesn't automatically mean you're Arabic, or automatically, mean you're Muslim. Now, Muslim and Islam is a religion of faith. The person I'm thinking of, I was talking about a meal, and she goes, oh, I'd like to try that. And I said, oh, it's a pork meal. And she goes, Lynn, I may be from Lebanon, but I'm not Muslim. And it just woke me up. So we have to kind of leave our assumptions at the door. I had someone say to me one day, oh, they speak Muslim. I'm like, oh, no, that's not quite it. So we really have to do a little deeper digging, and we need to share this information with our teachers and give them an opportunity to have that information come to them in some way, instead of them reinventing the wheel. Now, some parents don't want to share information, and that's where we have to dig a little deeper. And if the students are older, you can actually just talk to them. Different experiences and background knowledge really depends where they're coming from, in terms of perhaps they're coming from, as some of your students from Ukraine, war-torn experience, where they've had somewhat of an English education. And now they're reuniting with families here in Canada, like mom, who's been here for many years. Those all affect how a student is going to integrate into the community and your school communities. In terms of background knowledge, we can't make assumptions. We must just do a little connecting and figuring out, hey, if we're talking about space, do our students even know that people have been on the moon, that there's a space station? And that's an example of some students we got from a Thai refugee camp. They did not have that background knowledge that the typical Canadian-born student might have. One of the other things we need to be aware of is that we may be talking today about newcomers, but we also have students who are Canadian-born, and that we can't forget about their needs. Their needs are different. The students may sound like they know English, but they may not have moved through the benchmarks as well as they could have with supports. And of course, our families are coming with many, many expectations. They're coming believing that their children are going to go on to post-secondary the same way a Canadian-born English-speaking first language student would. And if your students are older, I know we have some elementary folks here, but if your students are coming in late junior high and high school, they may not make it through that 3 years of high school and have the 100 credits and marks they need to pursue post-secondary right away. They may need additional years, as we mentioned at our meeting last week, which is available to your high school students. And they may have to, after high school, look at some further supports in language, and maybe even taking additional courses to get those marks to get them into post-secondary. That's what the parents, if they have chosen to immigrate to Canada, that's why they're here, to give their children a better life and a better education. I'm not sure if you're aware, a lot of our Filipino students, in the Philippines, they graduate at 16 and they start university right after graduation. So when they come here and they're 16, they expect they're going to go on to post-secondary, and they are all about university. They are not interested in technical colleges. So we really have to explain to parents what some of the other avenues of post-secondary might be. Expectations can also involve the type of education we have. It looks different than back home. It's not all rote learning. There's group work. What does group work look like? How does homework look here versus homework at home? So those are all things that your teachers need to understand, have to be conversations with families. So where do we begin? Well, it all begins right there at your office. Whether the family is bringing in their student for that very first encounter with your school. Hello, I'm here. Whatever way they're communicating, start school. They want to start school. I'm not sure your schools or division's policy. I've been lucky enough to work in many schools where they can register that first day they arrive, but they say you'll start tomorrow. So that gives the school a chance to figure out where that student should be placed, which classroom, and give that teacher time to prepare a space for that student, a desk, a cubby, a locker. And as we well know, those amazing admin assistants in our offices are that first person that many families meet. And that smile they offer is the most important thing that any family needs to see. And I've sadly heard of a lot of other stories and experienced them myself that may not always happen. That, sometimes language barriers can cause frustration. So, how do we figure that out? Let's look at the next slide. So my next slide, there we go. These are examples from other businesses or organizations, but I couldn't find my slide that showed a school that said, do you need an interpreter? So there it is in English, Arabic, and other languages. The other one to your right is, it's your right to have an interpreter. But you could create with your school division a sign that says this at your front office. And then there are ways to access interpreters, whether it be a phone access, which a lot of school systems use, or the ones your division may have access to through some of your settlement agencies. And then even, and not always is this a good idea, but perhaps staff members or other trusted community members. But keep in mind that other staff members, this is an additional job if we're asking them to do interpretation. And we also have to be careful we're not asking people to be interpreters that aren't trained when it comes to report cards, IPPs, benchmarks, or other private information. I've seen things go really sideways. And of course, what everybody's talking about are translation apps or other types of devices that you could possibly use. There are limitations, they're not perfect, but our families are coming with phones with different apps and they are comfortable using them. There is a device called the Pocket Talk device. It's an investment of $300-400 that is really, really good. I wouldn't use the earbuds unless that someone has that personally, because we don't want to be sharing earbuds, although I'm not sure if they have other means of access. But those are some different things schools may want to look at. Does your school have some kind of welcome kit for not just EAL newcomers, maybe all newcomers, all new students to your school, but in particular newcomers? I highly suggest, and I'll show you some examples of visuals. Big photos, visuals with labels on them, whether it's people in the school or places in the school they might need to know, the hallway where Div 1 is, or the kindergarten room, the map of your school, perhaps even a list of community supports or connections. And our students need to see themselves. They need to see themselves. This comes from my colleagues in the Indigenous Education unit. In the halls, on the walls, and in the books. On the walls, we're pretty good. And here are some examples of that. They need to see their languages, where they come from, flags, words. You can have families that meet the teacher night, contribute and do bulletin boards. Careful with flags. I've had one school say, oh, we had a complaint that our flag wasn't up. And of course, there are challenges around different conflicts around the world. But languages are possibly a safer bet than flags. That's political. But have visuals of your students and the children around your schools. In the books, we'll talk about that in a bit. So peer ambassadors and buddies. These are great systems to have in place. And it's always great if you have a child that can be supportive in first language. But you have to be aware that perhaps pairing up a male student with a female student may not always work depending upon that student's faith or culture. And we can't always assume that just because you come from the same country, that it would be a good fit. I know that if I were trying to explain, if I were paired up with someone from Newfoundland, that may not be a good fit for me because we have very different experiences. But that's okay. The best you can do is have a buddy. If you have one that has the same language, that's great. We've had high schools that set up newcomer activities before school starts that work really well, that I could also share at another time. Representation, whether it's representation in your library of languages with dual language books, you can find dual language books that are common, like The Very Hungry Caterpillar, to books that maybe not. So showing bonnets for our children who have hair that they wear bonnets with. Although my very blonde sister is wearing a bonnet these days. So I think they're becoming quite mainstream, which is really cool. Hijabs. Okay, my favorite thing to talk about, bandages. Now, Band-Aid only comes one color per box, so you'd have to buy a whole bunch of boxes. But there is a company in Canada called Heal in Color that have multiple colors of bandages. Pencil crayons, markers that are available in different skin tones. So these are things that could be provided, a few per classroom, just to ensure that our children can see themselves. One of the things I'd love schools to think about is how to create little cards, on a ring that show, lockers, but your lockers, not a generic picture off the internet or a cartoon of some kind, but actual photographs. So if you could have someone in your school create some kind of thing like that, that would help students get around those first few weeks that they're feeling really, really out of sorts if their language is that limited. And keep in mind, photographs in color are the best way to do that. Acknowledging and being aware that there are different holidays, different faith and cultural celebrations, that Christmas isn't the only thing in December. Diwali is around the corner. Ramadan will be coming up after the new year, I believe. I haven't checked lately. But just acknowledging, it doesn't have to be teaching any religion. You are just acknowledging and being aware when you plan your school calendar. If you're planning a camping trip with your older students, don't plan it during Ramadan. But it's as simple as putting up a sign that says Ramadan or Ramadan Mubarak. I had a student come to me just a couple years ago. She saw that on my door and she said, "Oh, can I come to gym with you? Because I'm not allowed to do dance and music during Ramadan and you're doing gymnastics." So it just helped her advocate for herself. And of course, acknowledging different languages. This is really important because we have so many students coming and saying that even today is cold. Well, we know that cold is coming. I would do a sign like this and share it with families, but I would put actual temperatures on this as well. But there's lots of graphics like this out there. So share this with families. It's really important. And good old school supply lists. Now, it was brought to my attention just the other day that some school divisions are not allowed to show name brands of anything. So that's a little harder to put photographs of things if you want a specific item because you're going to show name brands. But I think duotangs can, just look like, prong folders. I'm not sure how you would address that. But this is so helpful for all parents. And I know, speaking from experience, my husband needed help with that. So what I'd also like people to think about is Maybe this shouldn't be left up to every teacher to do this. Is there a way of doing, a bigger, for your whole school, something that wouldn't have to be every teacher reinventing the wheel? Because that takes time. And is there a way to create something a teacher can use? And that way, and that goes for a lot of things I've talked about and we'll talk about today. This is just something that I know many of our EAL students struggle with, and a lot of our any student with lockers. A little visual, a video tutorial, or you can even buy one number combinations that are really, really helpful for some of our students with specialized learning needs, as well as our EAL newcomers. All right, this is what you're here for, and this is where we can all have discussions. And please feel free to take screenshots. You'll receive the recording and the slides. But first of all, our teachers need to take a big, deep breath and not panic. Our first job is to help our students feel included, welcomed, and safe. And that is number one, because if you're not feeling welcomed, included, and safe, you cannot learn. And jumping right into curriculum for our EAL students is not helpful. And pushing them to pass a grade or pass a test or finish the curriculum, that's not likely going to happen. They need to start where they're at. And of course, that's the benchmarks, and that's where the benchmarks help you help your teachers. So understanding that it is not necessarily going to be at high school passing a 10-2 course when they're a brand new EAL student. Even though you feel like, as a teacher, I would feel like I failed the student, I didn't get them there, but it's not possible. Imagine, putting yourself in another country, in a place you don't understand the language, and trying to go to school, or your own child going to school in a foreign country, learning the language. We must stop and remember that. Your teachers need, and if I can go back, because I'm going to work a lot on this slide. So your teachers need professional development. The basics are foundational knowledge, the benchmarks 2.0 training, and lots of strategies, because not every strategy works for every student or for every teacher. I have to really feel that strategy is successful and the right fit. Culturally responsive teaching is good for all teachers of all students. And of course, trauma-sensitive practices. Everything from not forcing that little one to go to music when they're drumming. That drumming is upsetting them, and that's not a good fit at that moment for that child. It's helpful for teachers if there are division and school-wide processes and procedures around EAL students and welcoming them. They need what's expected of them. And I know your division's been doing a really good job at that. What are we doing with the benchmarks? Where do they lay? Are they in a program? Am I keeping the paper? Just really clear, laid out processes and procedures. Our teachers need resources. If you're talking about older students using guided reading books that are for younger children, those are not engaging for our older students. There are great resources out there, and I'll talk about resources as we go on. And time. Learning how to work with EAL students takes time. The students' learning takes more time. We cannot rush this process. It is not, we do a level this year, we do a level next year. That's not how the benchmark levels are created, and every student is different. Could time, and I know that right now the time of our educational assistants is very limited at schools. Is there a way to give some time to support our EAL students? Now, I'm of the belief that maybe the teacher could pull a small group, and the the EA could be with the larger group supporting them. There are different ways to access and create supports. That's just one way. Could they create books like we do for our students with specialized learning? The little booklets about what to expect in school. Take photographs, create the books, do the writing. Those are all really valuable uses of time. Worksheets aren't always the best use of time. And of course, our teachers really need support around what are we doing about PATs and other standardized tests for our EAL students? Are these students expected to write? And that's up to individual divisions to make those decisions. And one of the other questions I get a lot is special needs. My spidey senses are telling me it's more than EAL. What are your schools and school division looking at around students with special needs who are also ESL? Because there are kids who have those specialized learning needs. So what is it you're providing to your teachers about this? And of course, your teachers need patience and understanding because for many of them, this is new. So let's move on. These are just the new levels, and you're looking at 8 levels now. Simplified, though, it's not different by division. It's a 2-page document. And of course, we'll talk more about this in upcoming sessions. But just to be aware, things look different. My first thing, and this slide could be at the very beginning, but our students' names. We have to help our teachers and other school members get our students' names correct. We can't be giving nicknames. We can't be changing names. We need to support our teachers in practicing names. And that's one of the other reasons I like to give teachers one day to find out how to properly pronounce the child's name. Kids get tired of repeating their names, so they give up and give themselves a nickname. And I'm not sure how that's going to look going forward within the way we're allowed to change names. That's coming. So being careful with names. And you can provide teachers with resources in your school libraries about names, and I can send a list of name books. They're wonderful resources to have in your schools. And the idea of culture. Our schools are great at doing food and music and celebrations and acknowledging languages and dance. But there's that deeper understanding, and this is where culturally responsive pedagogies come in, and understanding that sometimes our students may be doing things that are culturally appropriate in their home country, whether it's not looking you in the eye or crossing their arms when you're teaching and not taking notes. Those are all from different cultures. We can't know everything about every culture, but we can be open to asking questions and learning. Things like eating at school, not wanting to do that, the nodding and smiling, not wanting to participate in field trips, perhaps. There are all sorts of things that we need to find out and not assuming, but finding out. One of the things that a school could create, so individual teachers don't have to do this, is a way to prepare newcomers for fire drills and school lockdowns. What if Div 1 could have a little activity prepared for them, a slideshow prepared for them, school lockdown video, or something that's prepared so that every teacher doesn't have to do this. And these are 2 areas that newcomer students really do tend to panic in. So if those could be addressed early on for our students. And more about your libraries. Students need to see themselves, so not just their skin color and their hair, but their stories about coming to a new country, or what they wear, whether it's a hijab or whether it's having henna on their hands. So having these books in your schools, and again, I can send a list. It's not fully updated yet, but it's coming. Dual language books are a really great thing to have in your hallways for your parents to share with their younger children, or be available to sign out that older students can share with their siblings. So dual language books are readily available from different publishing houses as well as booksellers. So those are great to have on hand. So again, in your school libraries where teachers don't have to buy their own, like I did for many years. You may have picture dictionaries or English language dictionaries on your library shelves, but they need to be in your classrooms. And these are great things to have. If you have volunteers, they can help students by looking through these, talking about things, looking at the pictures. It's a great use of volunteer time. And it's also helpful for your students. Some of these, if your students are educated in their and literate in their first language, you can even get ones that are dual language, English and their first language, that are quite helpful. Other things that schools have done to support families that can be school-wide events, such as events to explain our assessment system, our report cards, our marks. I had a parent a couple of years ago who was very upset that her child didn't get A's because she knew her child could do these things. But those weren't the things I was assessing in that term. And so she didn't understand how our report cards worked. And those are really important conversations. Doing a night about reading. Reading is in, let's say, the Philippines, they learn to decode, and they're masters at decoding. But when they get lower marks and are told their child's reading at a lower grade level, they're not understanding that we have to have comprehension along with decoding. Perhaps your grade 6 parents could be invited, or whichever grade they move on to junior high, the year before, talking about what junior high is like, what the expectations are, and as well as what is senior high? What are the avenues and options? You can provide interpreters. These might not always be in the evening. They could be short coffee meetings in the morning, before school or at the beginning of the school day or right after school. Meeting the parents where they're at. And these are things that need to come from school administration or the division even. Perhaps they could create events if you have close schools around. And of course, providing childcare and food is a really big draw for our parents. This particular it's a Google site, and I'll ensure the link is in there. It was created a couple of years ago now by my predecessor in the consortium, and it has a whole section on welcoming families, but there's also great stuff in there for teachers. It's definitely the Alberta go-to site for anything EAL. So that's a great thing to share with with teachers, and I believe it's in your EAL site as well. But it's a good reminder to look. These resources come from the ATA and the Canadian Multicultural Education Foundation, and those are the ones that are currently available. I'm hoping that they do Spanish-speaking students coming up. I'm in conversations about that. I've had the honor of working on a couple of those. The newest is the students from Ukraine. Every school received one, but they are free to either download or you get a hold of the ATA and they send them out free. They are the most requested items at the ATA, but they are free. And this is my other go-to site for EAL, understanding knowledge. A lot of what I learned came from this site. And yes, it's American and a little heavy on the Spanish, but it's still all very, very good information. If you're interested, or teachers have an interest in more learning, these are the best resources out there. I've worked with all of these people. The bottom one on this slide is Canadian. And I highly recommend that one. I recommend all of these. I don't recommend things unless I've worked with these folks. And the bottom one on this slide is also Canadian, but I have worked with all of these folks as well. And there are some teachers who have a real interest in this. And if they've come to you, this is where you need to send them. And again, they're resources you could provide for your teachers. This is a resource for school administrators. It is a few years old, but it is still on the Alberta Education site, and it's what administrators need to know, and the link is there at the top. It's pretty basic information, but if you have a new administrator joining your staff, perhaps an assistant principal or a curriculum coordinator, this is a good just 4-page document that gives them a little bit of understanding of the basics of EAL, it should be called, but it hasn't been changed yet. If you or any of your staff members are interested, these are some wonderful nonfiction books, all about one of them. Trevor Noah isn't a Canadian, but all the rest of the books are Canadian. Holmes was written by a teacher in Edmonton Public, an award-winning book. How to Pronounce Knife is award-winning. Reuniting with Strangers is about Filipino family reuniting. And of course, our kids, Alfonso Davies is all the rage, our Canadian star. So just of interest, older students may be interested. The Trevor Noah book is available in a student version, but some great reads. Now, nobody's jumping in and asking me questions yet, but here's a time, and I can certainly provide you with as much as I can information-wise, and whatever I've missed today, I'll certainly try to address in our further sessions. But as administrators, what else would you like to get from this? Either holler it out or type it in. It's up to you. I know your time is precious.
I'm just going to stop the recording here, if that's okay with you, Lynn.
Yep. Okay, now folks can feel free to chat if they weren't comfortable before. Go ahead if